What deadly price did one star pay just to be himself? His brutal death shocked Hollywood and exposed the hidden dangers of being true to yourself in a world built on illusion. Behind the perfect smiles and glittering screens, 10 legendary men experienced fame, fear, and forbidden love. Today we explore the untold stories they were never allowed to share. Picture this: Hollywood in the 1920s. The cameras were silent, the stars shone in black and white, and the studios ran the city like kings in their castles. Into this glittering, tightly controlled world stepped a young man from Mexico, Ramon Novarro. A face made for the silver screen, charisma that could melt steel, and talent beyond compare. Before long, he was more than just a movie star. He was the Latin sweetheart of silent Hollywood. Valentino may have laid the groundwork, but Novarro took the torch and carried it on until he became a legend. Born José Ramón Gil Samaniego in 1899, he arrived in Hollywood as the industry was booming. He worked his way up, taking supporting roles until MGM finally realized what they had on their hands. With the 1925 epic Ben-Hur, Novarro became an international sensation. Audiences marveled at his beauty, his physical prowess, and his heroic screen presence. And for the studio, he was a box office gem. Thousands of fan letters poured in. Men wanted to be like him. MGM wanted him to be polished, perfect, and above all, straight. But behind the flashy premieres and studio promo photos, Ramon Novarro was living a very different life. He was gay, in an era when being openly gay in Hollywood wasn't just career-destroying, it could ruin your life. Studios had morals clauses, tabloids were ruthless, and the police, not friendly. So Novarro played the leading man of Hollywood by day and lived his real life quietly, carefully, by night. He never married, despite numerous rumors of romantic relationships with female stars. Off-screen, he surrounded himself with close friends, lovers, and members of Los Angeles' thriving but largely underground gay community. In that world, Novarro was known for his kindness, humor, and generosity. He hosted lavish parties at his home in the Hollywood Hills, often attended by other gay artists and actors who understood what it meant to live behind a mask. Like so many silent-era stars, his career faded with the advent of talkies. His soft voice was no longer enough to convince studios, and new stars began to dominate the spotlight. Still, he remained a respected figure in Hollywood, appearing in films and television throughout the 1930s, 1940s, and beyond. But Novarro's story is remembered not just for his fame, but also for its tragic ending. In 1968, at the age of 69, he was brutally murdered in his home by 2 young men he had invited. The sensational trial exposed his private life to the public in the worst possible way. The tabloids exploited every detail, turning his sexuality into a scandal rather than a simple truth about who he was. It was a grim reflection of Hollywood hypocrisy. A man celebrated on screen, but vilified in death for simply being himself. Yet Ramon Novarro's legacy endures. He broke barriers at a time when the industry allowed little room for fractiousness. He was one of the first Latino stars to achieve true global fame, and behind the scenes, he lived an authentic life in the shadows of a harsh era. He is now remembered not only as a movie icon, but also as one of Hollywood's first gay legends. A man whose beauty, talent, and courage made history. Novarro's life is a reminder. Behind every shiny billboard, there are stories the spotlight never touched, and some of those stories are more powerful than the movies themselves. Ramon wasn't the only star who dared to live a different life under the watchful eye of the studio system. Next, we turn to a man who looked MGM in the face and said, "No, thank you, I'll live my life my way." Before there were Instagram riots or dramatic celebrity coming out interviews on primetime TV, there was William Haines, the man who looked straight into the Hollywood gold machine and said essentially, "No, I'm not playing your game." This wasn't the 1980s. This was the late 1920s. At a time when the industry was built on illusion, he became the only star who refused to hide behind it. Born in Virginia in 1900, William Haines wasn't destined to be Hollywood royalty. He ran away from home as a teenager, opened a small shop in New York, and then, almost by accident, found his way to the silver screen. Tall, handsome, naturally charismatic, he was Hollywood's favorite leading man in silent films. By 1926, MGM had made him one of their biggest stars. His witty, mischievous on-screen persona left audiences both swooning and laughing. But what audiences didn't know, or perhaps secretly suspected, was that William Haines was gay. And here's the twist. He didn't live in fear of it. Unlike most of his colleagues who shied away from studio morals, Haines lived openly with his friends and in Hollywood's gay circles. He met his partner, Jimmy Shields, in 1926, and they were inseparable from then on. In private, their relationship wasn't a rumor, it was a fact. Friends described them as a genuine couple, charming and capable. MGM, however, wasn't enamored. In an era when studios controlled everything, image, wardrobe, dinner dates, Haines's refusal to marry a woman simply because of his looks was revolutionary. In 1930, after a scandal involving a police raid on a YMCA, MGM gave him an ultimatum: marry a woman to repair his image or lose his career. Haines didn't hesitate. He chose love over Hollywood. Think about it. In the studio age when fame was everything, he walked away. The decision shocked the public, shocked insiders, and quietly inspired countless others who couldn't make the same choice. MGM blacklisted him, but the story didn't end there. It didn't even end there. Haines reinvented himself dramatically. With a keen eye for style and a charming personality, he forged a new career, becoming one of the most sought-after interior designers in Beverly Hills. His clients? Well, just a few names you might have heard of: Joan Crawford, Carole Lombard, Gloria Swanson. He and Jimmy Shields turned their partnership into a personal and professional empire, designing homes for Hollywood's elite with elegance and sophistication. He went from leading man to trendsetter, proving that there was life and success beyond the studio gates. What made William Haines remarkable wasn't just that he was gay at a time when that was unthinkable for a star. It was that he owned it. He didn't make a statement, he didn't campaign. He simply lived his life authentically and refused to be scripted by anyone else. And Hollywood, despite its efforts to bury him, could not completely erase his image. Decades later, historians now look back and see him for what he truly was: a pioneer. A man who broke through the walls of the studio system with his authenticity and sharp style. Haines and Shields were together for nearly 50 years, until Haines died in 1973. Shields, devastated, committed suicide soon after. A tragic but deeply moving testament to a relationship that endured beyond Hollywood fame. William Haines not only survived the system, he surpassed it. His story is one of those rare moments in early Hollywood when a man chose love over fame and triumphed in his own way. But while Haines has been away from the Hollywood limelight, our next star has been living it up, playing the romantic lead so convincingly that few would suspect the truth behind that gentlemanly smile. Let's be honest, when you think of classic Hollywood charm, one name floats to the top like champagne bubbles: Cary Grant. Smooth, sophisticated, impossibly handsome. He was the man who could make a tuxedo look like armor and a witty line sound like poetry. On screen, he was the perfect gentleman, the romantic lead every woman dreamed of and every man wanted to be. But behind that dazzling smile was a personal life that Hollywood didn't quite know how to handle. Born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England, Cary Grant didn't come from glamour. He came from working-class streets, a broken home, and a childhood marked by hardship. His father sent his mother to a mental institution when Cary was just 9, telling him she had died. Imagine growing up with that lie. That kind of trauma doesn't disappear, it shapes you. Grant reinvented himself in America, joining vaudeville, crossing the Atlantic, and polishing himself into the elegant figure the world would soon worship. By the 1930s, Hollywood had its new leading man. Films like Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, and North by Northwest turned him into a legend. He had timing like a comedian, looks like a prince, and the kind of magnetism studios dream about. But Cary Grant's personal life? That was the real Hollywood mystery. For decades, whispers rippled through Tinseltown. Whispers about his long, close relationship with fellow actor Randolph Scott. The two met on a Paramount set in 1932, became inseparable, and soon moved into a shared beach house in Santa Monica. The press dubbed them the Bachelors, publishing photo spreads of their domestic life, cooking breakfast, sunbathing, sharing a home. It looked frankly like a couple. In a time when studios arranged fake romances to keep up appearances, Grant and Scott's open living arrangement was practically scandalous. Publicists scrambled to pair Grant with glamorous actresses, staging dates for the cameras. But behind the scenes, the two men shared a bond that lasted for over a decade. Some friends described it as love, others as the deepest companionship of his life. Grant married 5 times over the years, each union dissected by the tabloids. Some said he was searching for stability. Others said he was searching for something he already had, but could never publicly claim. Biographers have pored over letters, testimonies, and photos, piecing together a story the studio system tried hard to erase. And while Grant never made a public statement about his sexuality, the evidence of his intimate life speaks volumes. Here's where it gets interesting. While many stars hid their private lives completely, Cary Grant's relationship with Scott was both hidden and visible at the same time. Hollywood insiders knew, gossip columnists hinted, yet his image remained untouched. Proof of just how powerful the studios were at crafting illusions. But Cary Grant himself was never a passive character in that illusion. He controlled his image with meticulous care. Off-screen, he was intelligent, introspective, and sometimes elusive. Friends described him as a man constantly negotiating who he was versus who the world wanted him to be. In the later years of his life, after retiring from film, Grant avoided the circus of Hollywood gossip. He focused on business, travel, and fatherhood. But his story has continued to intrigue generations, not as a tale of scandal, but as a story about identity, privacy, and the human complexity behind the legend. Cary Grant remains one of Hollywood's greatest enigmas. Was he a romantic hero who played his role perfectly, or a man quietly rewriting the rules in the spotlight? Probably both. We've been back in Hollywood's golden age together, and I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Leave a comment below with your country, city, or even your favorite Cary Grant movie. Let's see where this golden age is headed. By the 1950s, Hollywood had a new type of leading man. Broad-shouldered, clean-cut, patriotic to the core, the kind of face that fit perfectly on war posters and movie marquees. And right at the center of that image stood George Nader. He had the looks, the voice, and the screen presence that studios loved. But what Hollywood didn't expect was that Nader would also become the center of a real-life story that exposed just how far the industry would go to protect its image and destroy someone else's. George Nader was born in Pasadena, California in 1921. After serving in the U.S. Navy during World War II, he returned home and, like many veterans, tried to find his place in peacetime America. For Nader, that place turned out to be in front of the camera. His striking features and genuine charm quickly earned him roles in adventure serials and low-budget films. But it didn't take long for Hollywood's biggest players to notice. Universal Pictures signed him and pushed him hard as their next big star. By the mid-1950s, he was appearing alongside Tony Curtis and Jeff Chandler, carving out a niche as a dependable, likable leading man. There were magazine spreads, studio promotions, fan clubs, the whole Hollywood machine working to build the George Nader brand. But behind the polished publicity, Nader was quietly living his truth. He was gay, and unlike many of his peers, he didn't live in terror of exposure. He wasn't waving a flag, but he wasn't living a lie either. His closest friends knew. He had a devoted partner, Mark Millar, a fellow actor who would become his lifelong companion. Within their circle, it was an open secret. But outside, different rules applied. Enter the villain of this story, Confidential magazine. If TMZ and a tabloid had a baby in the 1950s, this was it. Confidential made millions by printing Hollywood's dirtiest secrets. Studio bosses feared it, stars dreaded it, and in the mid-50s, the magazine set its sights on George Nader. The publication reportedly had evidence of Nader's sexuality and threatened to publish it, unless the studios gave them a bigger prize, Rock Hudson. Universal, terrified of losing their #1 moneymaker, cut a deal. Hudson was protected. Nader became collateral damage. Roles started to disappear. Invitations dried up. He was quietly pushed to the margins. In a few short years, George Nader went from rising star to Hollywood exile, not because of scandal, but because of who he loved. But here's where Nader's story takes a surprising turn. Instead of retreating into shame, he built a new life on his own terms. He and Mark Millar moved to Europe, where the press was less intrusive and the work was steady. Nader became a major star in German cinema, especially in a series of popular crime thrillers. The Hollywood system tried to erase him, but he simply took his spotlight elsewhere. And then in 1978, he did something few actors of his generation dared. He published a science fiction novel called Chrome. It wasn't just any sci-fi story. It was one of the first explicitly gay sci-fi novels ever published, imagining a future where love between men wasn't something to hide. For a man whose career had been sidelined by a homophobic industry, this was a bold, almost poetic act. George Nader never returned to Hollywood superstardom, but he lived a full, authentic life with Mark Millar for over 50 years. When Nader passed away in 2002, Millar followed him just weeks later, a love story quietly stronger than any Hollywood script could have written. His story isn't about scandal. It's about resilience. It's about what happens when someone refuses to let an industry define their worth. George Nader's life forces us to ask a bigger question. What would Hollywood history look like if more stars had been allowed to live honestly? And maybe the real question is, what stories are we still not hearing today? When it comes to pure acting power, few names from Hollywood's golden age loom as large as Charles Laughton. He wasn't the matinee idol with the perfect jawline or the smooth-talking romantic lead. No, Laughton was something else entirely. He was a force. He could command a stage, dominate a screen, and leave audiences breathless with a single look. He was also a man living with a truth he could never publicly share, carrying it like a quiet weight beneath the roar of applause. Born in England in 1899, Laughton grew up in a strict Catholic family before discovering his love for the theater. His talent was obvious early on. Deep voice, expressive face, unmatched emotional range. By the time Hollywood came calling in the 1930s, he was already a respected stage actor. What followed was a career packed with unforgettable performances. The tyrannical Captain Bligh in Mutiny on the Bounty, the hunchbacked bell ringer in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and countless other roles that showcased a man who could disappear into any character. He won an Oscar, directed one of cinema's greatest thrillers, The Night of the Hunter, and earned the respect of his peers as an artist's artist. But while Laughton's talent burned brightly, his personal life was kept in the shadows. He was gay, something he never acknowledged publicly. In that era, the British press could be just as merciless as Hollywood tabloids, and homosexuality wasn't just scandalous, it was illegal. So he lived a carefully constructed double life. The most fascinating part of his life was his marriage to actress Elsa Lanchester, best known as the Bride of Frankenstein. Their union puzzled many, but after his death, she revealed it was built on deep friendship and mutual respect, not romance. They were true partners, protecting each other in a world that wouldn't accept the truth. Laughton's sexuality was something he wrestled with internally, not publicly. Some who knew him described a man who carried both pride and pain. Pride in his work, pain in knowing he could never fully live as himself. And yet, his performances are filled with such raw humanity that you can't help but wonder if that internal struggle is exactly what made his art so extraordinary. He wasn't pretending on screen. He was channeling every corner of himself into his craft. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Laughton didn't run from Hollywood's gaze or stage carefully crafted illusions. He simply outperformed everyone else. His career became a kind of armor, a way to control the narrative without ever saying a word about who he truly was. Charles Laughton's story is a powerful reminder that some of Hollywood's greatest legends carried invisible battles while giving the world unforgettable art. His genius thrived in public, but his truth remained private, a tension that defined not just his life, but an entire generation of performers. How many of the Golden Age's greatest talents were shaped not only by their gifts, but by the secrets they were forced to keep? And what might their stories have looked like in a world that let them be fully seen? If you're enjoying uncovering these hidden chapters of Hollywood history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from the Golden Age. If Hollywood's Golden Age had a court jester, a man who could make kings, queens, and entire audiences laugh while dancing on the edge of mystery, that man was Kaye. He wasn't the typical Hollywood leading man. He didn't brood like Montgomery Clift or smolder like Cary Grant. Instead, Kaye lit up a room the second he stepped into it. His face was elastic, his timing flawless, his talent almost unfair. He could sing, dance, act, mimic accents, rattle off tongue twisters at lightning speed, a one-man variety show wrapped in a red-headed, quick-witted package. Born David Daniel Kaminsky in Brooklyn in 1911, Kaye was the son of Ukrainian Jewish immigrants. He climbed the ladder of entertainment the old-fashioned way. Vaudeville stages, Catskills resorts, and Broadway lights before Hollywood finally called. By the 1940s and 50s, he wasn't just a star. He was a phenomenon. Films like The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, 1947, and White Christmas, 1954, showcased a performer so charismatic, so effortless, that critics often struggled to define him. He wasn't quite like anyone else. But behind the lightning-fast patter and big musical numbers, Kaye's personal life became the stuff of Hollywood whispers. Unlike George Nader or William Haines, Kaye never publicly lived with a male partner. He was married to songwriter Sylvia Fine for most of his life, and their professional partnership helped shape his career. But the rumors? They were relentless. For decades, gossip swirled about a close, possibly romantic bond between Kaye and legendary actor Laurence Olivier. Their friendship was intense, their travels frequent, and Olivier even cast him in The Entertainer. Neither ever confirmed anything, and in Golden Age Hollywood, ambiguity itself became a shield. The intrigue around Kaye's sexuality came not from scandal, but from how smoothly he sidestepped Hollywood's rigid boxes. He didn't fit the macho mold or hide behind a facade. Instead, he embraced his unique, playful persona, becoming one of the era's most beloved entertainers while keeping the world guessing. Beyond the gossip, Kaye's legacy is remarkable. He was one of the first major celebrities to use his fame for humanitarian work, becoming UNICEF's first Goodwill ambassador and traveling the world to raise money for children in need. Offstage, he was deeply curious, passionate about aviation, and famously complex, a man who could make millions laugh, yet remained a mystery to even his closest friends. Danny Kaye's story is less about revelations and more about the spaces between the lines. He wasn't defined by public labels, but by a life lived at full volume on his own terms. And that raises a question: how much of a person's truth belongs to the public, and how much remains theirs alone? Out of all the legends we've explored so far, who stands out to you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear which Golden Age star captured your imagination. In the glittering constellation of Golden Age Hollywood stars, some shone brightly, some flickered briefly, and a few moved quietly among them, leaving behind whispers rather than headlines. Anthony Bushell belonged to that last group. He wasn't a prominent face on every billboard, but he was there, in movies, in elegant drawing rooms, in the hidden corners of Hollywood history. Born in 1904 in Westerham, Kent, Bushell embodied British sophistication. Educated at Harrow and trained on stage, he carried the polished confidence Hollywood loved. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, he appeared alongside legends like Greta Garbo and Errol Flynn, his gentlemanly charm making him the ideal officer, confidant, or foil to Hollywood's rugged heroes. But Bushell's story isn't remembered for a breakthrough role. It's what happened off-screen. Or rather, what didn't happen on screen. You see, Bushell slinked into Hollywood society as a man who knew the rules but never came out publicly as an actor. He was a regular at George Cukor's legendary Sunday meetings, private gatherings where stars, writers, and then reticent gay men could converse freely. In a time when coming out as gay could end a career, or worse, these spaces were a rare haven of peace. Bushell didn't get into scandal. He left no tabloid fodder or courtroom drama. He simply existed, quietly, gracefully, in the networks of secrecy that allowed gay Hollywood to breathe under the stifling studio system. The British press rarely delved into private lives as deeply as the American tabloids, and Bushell benefited from that secrecy. He maintained a steady, if unobtrusive career, then moved into producing and directing. He collaborated with Laurence Olivier on Shakespeare adaptations and contributed to wartime propaganda films during World War II. His talent was respected, but his private life was not mentioned. And it is precisely that silence that makes Anthony Bushell's story so compelling. Unlike William Haines, he did not openly challenge the system. Unlike George Nader, he was not forced out by scandal. Unlike Ramon Novarro, he did not meet a tragic end. He represents something else entirely. The countless gay men of Hollywood's golden age who survived not through rebellion or fame, but through quiet fortitude. Their stories didn't make the headlines. They weren't discussed in the same way. But their existence built the hidden foundations of gay Hollywood, the networks of friendship, trust, and shared understanding that allowed others to coexist. Bushell's life reminds us that not all stories are loud. Some stories have power precisely because they are behind the scenes. Anthony Bushell may not have been a headline star, but he was part of the invisible architecture of an era. A reminder that history is shaped not just by celebrities, but also by those who remain in the shadows. How many lives have been lived in silence, never recorded, but no less real? If this story touches your heart, please share this video with your friends so more people can discover forgotten chapters from Hollywood's past. Your support will help us bring more powerful stories to life. If there was a face of rugged masculinity in the golden age of Hollywood, it was Randolph Scott. Tall, lean, square-jawed, he looked as if he had been carved from the very mountains his cowboy characters rode through. On screen, he wasn't just a man, he was a man. Tough, chivalrous, the kind of man who faced danger with a steady gaze and a spotless white hat. For decades, audiences saw him as the embodiment of the American frontier spirit. But behind the scenes, Randolph Scott's personal life told a much more complicated and quietly radical story. Born in 1898 in Virginia, Scott came from a wealthy Southern family and carried himself with a gentlemanly demeanor that contrasted sharply with the rugged gunslingers he later portrayed. After a brief stint in the Army during World War I, he came to Hollywood in the late 1920s. By the 1930s, he had found his footing in westerns, first as a supporting actor, then as a leading man. But things really began to get going in the early 1930s, when Scott happened upon another rising star, Cary Grant. Both were handsome, ambitious, and living in a Hollywood system that valued image over talent. They soon became attached. They shared a house in Santa Monica, nicknamed Bachelor Hall by the press. Reporters photographed them sunbathing together, cooking, decorating, living in many ways like a married couple, at a time when such living had no name, no public word. Of course, the studios were appalled. Two leading men living together? That didn't fit the story. Advertisers were quick to emphasize their bachelor lifestyles, spinning tales of glamorous flings with actresses. But photographs told a different story. Two men laughing in a shared garden, reading newspapers side by side, building a family life right in front of Hollywood's eyes. Neither man ever publicly defined their relationship. Some biographers describe it as a deep friendship that lasted more than a decade. Others hint at something romantic that changed over time. Whatever the exact truth, Randolph Scott and Cary Grant created something virtually unheard of in their time, a cohabitation between two male stars, hidden in plain sight. Scott's career flourished throughout the 1940s and 1950s, especially in a series of psychological westerns directed by Bud Buttigieg. Unlike many other stars, he retired at the height of his fame, opting for a quiet life with his second wife, Patricia Stillman. Yet the images of Scott and Grant at Bachelor Hall have never faded. They have become cultural legacies, proof that even the most masculine of Hollywood models can harbor private worlds that go beyond expectations. Randolph Scott never made grand pronouncements. He left no memoirs filled with confessions. He simply lived, walking the narrow space between public myth and private reality. His story is not one of scandal, but of subtle defiance, and perhaps that is what makes his legacy. The cowboy who represented the wild American frontier also built his own frontier, a private, domestic world that challenged the rigid standards of Hollywood without ever saying a word. Behind the legends we thought we knew, there were untold stories, lives lived boldly in the shadows, waiting decades for their moment to be seen. Their courage was unpretentious. It was expressed in quiet rooms, secret glances, and unspoken truths. These men carved out private spaces for themselves in a world that would not allow them to be seen. Today we honor all those who have had the courage to be true to themselves. If this story resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and share, so their legacy can resonate far beyond the golden screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.